virtual who will become his guide. And so, as I told you before, he will not walk alone. He will leave this dark forest. He will go through many adventures, and he will come to illumination, but he will always be guided by a mentor. And in the beginning, the relationship with the mentor is very important, but towards the end, they develop a true emotional bond. And this is reflected in the text. In the beginning, Dante refers to Virgil with reverence. He calls it my guide, my teacher. But by the end, he calls him my sweetest part, indicating how deep their emotional bond has become. But of course, I need to conclude by mentioning the close, unique bond that we have sometimes with one or few individuals. That is a kind of friendship where we realize that the friend is another self, is kind of a part of us. And this time, I'll give you an example, not from the ancient Greek, but from last century, and not from a philosopher, but from a novelist, who, however, is very philosophical. And that is Hermann Hesse. Hermann Hesse wrote many wonderful books in which he has friendships that are developed and are portrayed, but I think the most apt for us is this one, Narcissus and Gold. He described a peculiar friendship from two individuals that couldn't be any more different. Narcissus is outward directed, he's extrovert. He seeks the lives of a world of adventures, and he has some crazy adventures. Goldmouth is introvert, inward directed. And yet they become friends, and their friendship grows to riches. And at the end, they realize what was the gift that they got from the friend. And the gift was that through Goldmouth, Narcissus realized the importance of sometimes going inward. And by contrast, Goldmouth through Narcissus realized the importance of sometimes relating to it. And so Hermann Hesse tells us that the critical thing about friendship, what the friendship does really for us, if it is a true friendship, is that the friend reveals to us something that is within us, but we cannot access. And that is the great gift that the friend can give us. But let me conclude with something a bit more peculiar, something that I find truly fascinating. And that's my last point. It's a peculiar teaching from the great Italian Renaissance humanist, Petrarch. Now, Petrarch had a lot of friends in flesh and bones, but he realized that you could develop powerful friendship also with people that lived a long time ago. And how do you do it? Through books. By reading books again and again, and with attention and relating them to your own life, you can, so to speak, become friends with the authors of these books, people who lived sometimes even 1,000 years ago. And he takes it a step further, and in some of his letters, he actually writes letters to philosophers from the past, to Cicero and Seneca. And he shares his life, his struggles, his joys. And the more he does it, the more he connects with them. So, in conclusion, I hope that when you look back at this year, you will realize that you didn't just learn a lot of interesting things about friendship, but you learned something more important, that there are friends out there in the form of author of books. And they are there for you. They can give you consolation, they can give you help, and they can give you joy. And the only thing you have to do is to pick up a book and read it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Donato. Okay, we're going to open the floor to some questions.
Do you think that the presence of social media in today's society is overall beneficial or detrimental to the existence of friendship?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm not for demonizing technology because I hope I can be considered young enough to remember a time in which the technology of my time, which was TV, was demonized. I think technology is a tool, and the point is just how we use it. I do think, however, that just being in presence with another person, in physical presence, that is very powerful. And going back to the ancient, this is why they didn't just write to each other, they didn't just correspond, they actually lived together. And this is why I think that being in the context in which you are, in a classroom, learning, and being in the same place has its own advantage. So if we use social media carefully and intelligently, they have a use, but I don't think that human beings can ever do without the physical presence of each other.
Great question, thank you. Other questions?
So I have a question of whether friendship should be like, does the friendship, the individual we're having friendship with have to be human? For example, like dogs, like you could have companionship with them and they're physical, or AI, you could have chats with them and like have sort of a bond with them, or even God, you could read books and form a mentorship sort of connection with God. So does the entity have to be human in order to cultivate friendship?
That's a great question. I am a lover of science fiction, and there are a lot of science fiction novels that explore moving friendships with robots. And if you're interested, you should read Asimov Foundation, where there is an incredible robot there. I think that, well, we don't know how AI will develop. I do think that the ancient, if there is an area that they really overlooked, that is really the bond with animals. Anybody who had an animal knows the kind of intuitive, emotional bond that we can create with animals. I think that what is important, and the lesson that we can get from the ancient, is that friendship, to be there, has to be more than just an emotion or something that we feel. It's something that we develop, because the more we cultivate commitment to another, whether it's a human, or whether it's a dog, or whether it's an author from a book from the past, it is this being there and trying to connect day in and day out that really makes a friendship. And this is why they distinguish so much friendship from romantic love. Because in romantic love, at least in their view, the emotional dimension take over. But in friendship, it's really something that you develop day by day. And so the good friend or the close friend, or as they call it, the perfect friend, is not someone that you develop a friendship with in one day. It's something that takes time, and it takes a specific effort, because it's something that grows, and when it grows, then it becomes something very small.
Another great question. Okay, I'm coming to the other side. Raise your hand again, there's one up there.
Hello. Oh, it's not here. So you speak, you're multilingual, right? In a lot of languages, there are different words for friendship, and a lot of things get mistranslated. So in your research and literary work, have you ever encountered a mistranslation that you were able to catch that changed the meaning of something that you read?
That's a great question. I think that sometimes the problem is that we just have the words that we have, and it becomes difficult to translate them in a way that it has a perfect correspondence. So you almost never have a one-to-one correspondence with even classical languages. And that's where my job comes, of writing a book with footnotes that are 3 pages long, and we can tell you, look, they use the word philia, and we translate it with friendship, because that's the best we can do, and it's still useful. And then the real challenge is to understand that in that context, the word means something different. And so, as the way to think about it, which I think is useful, is that when you encounter a word like friendship, or freedom, or love, that has this complex history, and it's a history that also is made complex because the way we understand this notion depends on various cultures that contribute. The best way to do is to really look at the development of the concept. So if you start with the classics, for the case of friendship, for instance, you try to see what they meant with friendship, and then you go to the Romans, and then you go down the line, and you trace all the developments. And that helps you to kind of overcome the linguistic limitations that we have.
Okay, we're just gonna try to squeeze in one more.
Thank you.
So going off of the school of philosophy and the kind of community structure that came with it, and especially in ancient times, I found that interesting because throughout history you have several examples of what you were describing. Just to name a few, you had Ubuntu in Africa, you had Plato's Academy in Greece, and you had the law of oneness in several Oriental nations. So that being said, my question is, in terms of the community / society or culture thriving in the long term while giving value to an individual, in your view, which is better, like this strong community structure where the individual matters a little bit less, or the kind of opposite, which seems to be the Renaissance kind of view where the individual actually matters a little bit more than the community? Which is better in the long term, in your mind?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think that what is better is a balance between the two. And I think that at least in principle, the Greeks really understood that. And the history of classical philosophy is really an example. Of course, the individual matters, and Plato, Aristotle wanted to develop their own views. But the individual matters with the understanding that the individual is always part of the context, and that he or she contributes to the context, and the context contributes to the individual. It is a balance, and so it's a balancing act, it's a tension. And sometimes we are pulled a little bit more in one direction, and sometimes in others. But I think that we have to aim to realize that even us as individuals, we can do what we do because we are in a community that makes it possible. But at the same time, we have to value that our contribution, even if it is small, is still important. So I would say we have to aim for balancing these two polar opposites.
Okay, thank you so much. So unfortunately, I think do we have time more?
Yeah.
We have time for one more?
We
No, okay. So we're so sorry. I'm sure that if you want to come down and ask your question directly to Professor Donato, we'll be happy to answer it. But we do have to kick everybody out. So please let's thank Professor Donato one more time. Definitely feel free to walk down and ask Professor Donato directly.
Do you put us off at 10, or is it like a 2-minute grace period? Okay. Remember the clarity guide.
I have another question. Can you check to see if I did I just read the.
What are you at band two?
So can you look
What's class for band two?
Ethan French?
Were you there? Did they take a payment? So let's just check. What's your name again? Wait. Not the right one?
Otherwise, I'm not taking it to the night bed.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure because I just did that email.
It's best to check into the main office and get the full information right now and sign in. But Sierra has you.
Thank you.
Everything except for
What do you mean I have to?
There you go.
Ready to the next friendship. It's been interesting. I still think I like Ethan Rich so far. Is the team for next year determined yet?
What the frick is that?
Technically, yes, but it's a secret.
Secret tomorrow announcement? Oh my goodness! That's so cool. I have a hat that goes with it.
How can I help?
We were wondering when we should come together.
Right immediately.
Like Grace is nothing there. I feel like Grace would love to see oh, you're attendance. Oh no! No, but you're supposed to check in for attendance. Oh well, from here I feel like so we have to go. Yeah, I think I'm more that. Yeah, because I have a class. Yeah. hungry right now.
Okay, we need you to go to the end of whatever row you're sitting in. So we can't sit in the middle, it's just gonna make things messier as more classes come in. So every row you're in, fill in all available seats all the way to the end. Okay. Okay. They're done.
Apparently one of us has to moderate this one. Yeah, can you moderate? Yeah, he's sending these emails. Okay, so here's, so Kathy's here. Kathy's here. I just wanted to talk. What time is it? I'll be free. Yeah.
So did you mark this for your
A band two?
no, for band.
Yeah.
Oh,
And then band six. Five.
No, it looks like a lot of us are here.
I don't think I don't know, but I don't think there's I don't think yeah. Just want to get these political emails out before it's too late in the afternoon.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. If you could all find a seat. I do see some empty seats in the middle. If you are currently next to a seat that's empty, if you could kind of raise your hands, let people know they can come join you. So if you're currently looking for a seat, look for a raised hand. There are some seats available. We'd like to hear from you to get started. As those of you that are looking for seats find your seats, I would like to welcome you to this panel of the 11th Annual Humanities Symposium. It is so good to see all of your faces. Just just for some context, for those that haven't been here yet, today we have a couple groups that are ready to present for you. They've been working on their papers and ultimately this presentation for the entire semester. They've done so much work, and this really, in so many ways, is the culminating moment of all of that work. So we're so happy that we have all of you here to witness this, and for all of you that are underclassmen, this could be you at this time, next year or some year in the not so distant future. Today's panel is entitled Friendship in 100 Years of Solitude. And I'm going to introduce the first group momentarily, but before I do, I just want to ask that all of you kind of pay close attention to our presenters today and to try to think of a question or two that you might consider asking them. At the end, we will have time for a couple questions, and we'd love to see what our presenters have to share in response to those questions. But anyway, without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our first presenting group for this panel, and that is led by the following students: Isabella Chapman, Sophia Duki, and Leilani Walks, and their piece is entitled Cycles of Faith, Friendship, and Intergenerational Trauma in 100 Years of Solitude. So let's put our hands together.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sophia. I'm Isabella. And I'm Leilani. And today we will be sharing our presentation with you entitled Cycles of Faith, Friendship and Intergenerational Trauma in our thesis text, 100 Years of Solitude. So 100 Years of Solitude is a magical realism novel written by Latin American author Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It is set in the mythical and remote town of Macondo, which is geographically isolated from the outside world. The story follows multiple generations of the Buendia family, starting with Jose Arcadio Buendia. Following him, each generation of the family contains characters who are withdrawn and tend to find themselves in solitude. This perpetual solitude damages their ability to form healthy relationships and becomes a key part of the family's downfall. Our thesis for this presentation is that in 100 Years of Solitude, intergenerational trauma and behavioral repetitions cause recurring cycles of isolation and infections, highlighting that the Buendia family is destined to live in eternal solitude. In order to establish our thesis, we'll begin with the following steps. First, we'll make a comparison to a text written by another Latin American author that establishes the teaching in our thesis text. Then, we will conduct an overview of the main themes in 100 Years of Solitude in order to perform a close reading of certain scenes and characters. Finally, we will use these analyses to draw conclusions about friendship in the novel. Labyrinths is a collection of short stories and essays by Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges. It is comprised of various parables and metaphysical ideas, exploring themes such as dreams, the concept of infinity, mythology, mirrors, and of course, labyrinths. Labyrinths, unlike mazes, do not try to trick you by having multiple paths or dead ends. You enter a labyrinth through one entry point and go through one continuous path that leads you to its center. There is ultimately only one place to end up in when entering a labyrinth, showing that there's a clear path laid out for you from the very beginning. One of Borges' short stories collection that exemplifies the labyrinth motif is titled Circular Dreams. In this tale, a man arrives at a temple and attempts to bring another man into existence. He puts all of his effort into this and ultimately succeeds. He dreams of a son. However, the story ends by revealing that the man who is trying to dream a man into existence is ultimately dreamed into existence by another man. This complex ending underscores the story as an example of a labyrinth. The events of the story loop back onto themselves and form the circular maze of the story's title, where beginnings and endings become blurred. The events occurring in 100 Years of Solitude serve as their own labyrinth, due to the cyclic nature of characters becoming socially withdrawn, until the family is wiped out of existence by a fierce windstorm. These are the central ideas of our presentation. The cycle of trauma and repetition defines the idea of family story. The ideas repeat the same emotional mistakes, particularly in their relationships, and they rarely reflect or challenge on their inherited behaviors. This is due to the repetition of names in the family, which is inherited by similar character traits across generations. As we will see, its inability to break through the cycle leads not just to personal suffering, but the eventual downfall of both the family and the convict.
The cycle of isolation of the Buendia is initiated by the trauma that gets passed down from generation to generation. Jose Arcadio II and Aureliano suffered from the absence of their father, who was usually too absorbed in his science experiments to pay any attention to them. Neither brothers knew how to properly show affection or develop a real connection with someone, which is no doubt the result of their upbringing with a father who always had his head in the clouds. As a result, most relationships in the book are full of betrayal, silence, or loneliness. Following the Civil War, Colonel Aureliano Buendia becomes so emotionally damaged that he abandons all of his relationships. This shows how emotional trauma, like war and abandonment, gets passed down and damages more than just family ties.
Chestnut trees are meant to symbolize new life-giving energy. However, in 100 Years of Solitude, it symbolizes anything but that. The Buendia's house has had a chestnut tree in its backyard since the founding of the condo. It is to this tree where Jose Arcadio Buendia is tied to when he goes mad and begins speaking in an indecipherable tongue. He then spends the rest of his life tied to the tree, remembered only by his descent into madness. His son, Colonel Aureliano Buendia, dies in front of this tree, displaying the generational trauma that ties them together. The way that this inheritance of emotional trauma comes to a close is one of the most devastating aspects of the novel. Aureliano of Babylonia has a son also named Aureliano, who dies as a newborn due to his father's neglect. Baby Aureliano's corpse is then eaten by ants, putting an end to the cycle of trauma in the most tragic way imaginable.
Tradition plays a big part in keeping the cycle going. The Buendias are obsessed with keeping their family image and repeating the same names, specifically Jose Arcadio and Aureliano, over and over. Each name comes with a set of traits and expectations. This locks the characters into roles they can't escape. In the end, both the condo and the Buendia family are destroyed, demonstrating how refusing to face the past and repeating toxic traditions leads to total collapse.
In total, there are 2 Ursulas, 3 Remedioses, 5 Jose Arcadios, and 22 Aurelianos, all within the same family. Although these characters are all not alive at the same time, the same name is used enough times to reference one person for it to become extremely confusing for the reader. Names aren't the only similarity between characters who share them, however. Characters with the same name in this novel exhibit similar character traits, and therefore end up meeting similar tragic fates. Characters like the Jose Arcadios are both impulsive and self-serving, whereas the Aurelianos are quiet and brilliant but tortured. Both groups of characters are equally as lonely, as their relationship with others repeatedly get destroyed. This relentless repetition of names and personalities throughout the novel blurs all individuality between the characters and establishes that the Buendia family is fated to live and die in solitude.
Friendships often end very badly in the conduct. The character of Melquiades, the leader of the gypsy band, becomes a close friend of Jose Arcadio Buendia. Melquiades brings new scientific technologies to the convent, introducing Jose Arcadio to the wider world. However, despite Melquiades widening his world, Jose Arcadio ultimately loses himself in his own mind. Melquiades, on the other hand, lingers in the convent. Before dying, Melquiades had worked on a manuscript that was initially indecipherable to Buendia. This manuscript tells the Buendia's history honestly, without any deceit or erasure. It is the family's only way of telling their story and ensuring that their history is not lost to Muhammad's isolation leaves the characters largely unaware of the developments in the modern world. The characters' perceptions of the world are largely confined to the boundaries of the town. While the outside world changes, Wakano's inhabitants remain trapped in a cycle of repetitive patterns and behavior.
The cycle of solitude experienced by the Bandidos is an omnipresent, powerful force that seeps into every aspect of their lives. One of the ways they are most affected by this perpetual cycle is through their relationships, which are often shallow, unfulfilled, and fleeting. Whether it be through friendships or relationships alike, the Bandido clan continuously repeats the patterns of their ancestors when it comes to pushing people away. Colonel Aureliano Buendia and Colonel Garnaldo Marquez are an example of the friendship that is fated to fail. Garnaldo Marquez is Colonel Aureliano Buendia's childhood friend turned comrade when they both joined the Congo Civil War. In the beginning of the war, the two shared a strong bond as they were on the same side politically. However, as the war goes on, Aureliano becomes more and more absorbed in obtaining power and status, devolving their friendship into one of convenience. As the war goes on, Aureliano becomes a shell of a man who is utterly broken by the trauma and defeat he has faced. His ego and hunger for power clouds his judgment, and he pushes Garnaldo away, who just wanted to end all of the pointless fighting and death. Aureliano even goes as far as to sentence his friend Garnaldo to death for wanting to abandon their cause, demonstrating just how fickle and emotionally detached he is. Another example of a friendship that has a tragic ending is Rebecca and Amaranta, who are cousins. The two girls grow up like sisters and have begun to fight over a man named Pietro Crespi. When Pietro Crespi chooses Rebecca over Amaranta, Amaranta keeps scheming to break them apart. Rebecca, however, ends up getting married to someone else, and when her husband passes away, she confines herself to her home and doesn't interact with anyone. Amaranta, on the other hand, remains unmarried for the rest of her life, only having small flings with her nephew, as well as Colonel Germanello, never to turn into anything more substantial. The girls' dispute over Crespi marks the point of no return in their relationship, as both girls wind up living the rest of their lives being lonely and miserable people. At no point do any of them attempt to rekindle their friendship, and they just move on to live lives that do not involve the other person.
One of the strongest examples of repeating patterns is seen in the family's romantic relationships, which are often rooted in incest. From the beginning, Jose Arcadio Buendia and Ursula worry about having children together because they are first cousins. Their fear of having a child with a pigtail becomes a symbol of a deeper curse. That fear ends up coming true generations later when Aureliano Babilonia and his aunt Amaranta Ursula have a child together who is born with the dreaded pigtail. Jose Arcadio Buendia's second son, even tries to seduce his mother, to which she thankfully refuses. But that doesn't erase the strange tradition that persists in their family. The Buendia's social disengagement with the people extending beyond their family's causes for their twisted attempt at escaping solitude, looking for love where it is forbidden. This shows that the family's history repeats itself, no matter how hard they try to escape it or prevent it. Their love is not based on healthy connection, but confusion, obsession, and faith.
Melchiades' manuscript represent the labyrinth in this novel that causes the Buendia's relationships to be as twisted as they are. When Aurelio Bagliano finally deciphers the manuscript, he realizes that he is reading a record of his family's history. This manuscript chronicles everything that has ever happened in the Congo and how Winston will eventually destroy the town. Even his reading of the manuscript is included. No sooner has Aurelio Bagliano finished reading the manuscript that everything around him gets swept up by a strong wind, signaling the arrival of a rainstorm. The manuscript denoting the family's every move was the Buendia's labyrinth all along, laying out a definitive path for them to appear to.
From Wakano's inception, the sexual, familial, or platonic interactions of the Buendia family are characterized by mythical tales. In addition to their names, each generation carries on their predecessors. Emotional tendencies, including preoccupation, alienation, and propensity for loneliness. Because of these inherent traits, characters frequently engage in the same demanding activities, making meaningful connections all but impossible. They are both victims and perpetrators of their own solitude, destined from the beginning to experience life.
This has been our presentation. Thank you.
gonna jump right into our second group of students. And these students are Ria Chowdhury, Emily Dunn, Bridget Youngering, and Abby Cronenberg, and Ashley Lab. And their piece is entitled Solitude as a Societal Curse in 100 Years of Solitude. So let's put our hands together for our next presenters.
Hi everyone, welcome to. Hi everyone, welcome to our presentation on 100 Years of Solitude, a Curse upon Humanity. My name is Ria.
My name is Bridget. My name is Abby. My name is Emily.
And I'm Ashley. And we're going to start our presentation. Okay, so we've all felt it, that quiet weight of solitude, whether in a crowded room or in the stillness of our own thoughts. Isolation affects us all. In 100 Years of Solitude, Gabriel Garcia Marquez transforms that feeling into a generational curse, one that haunted Buendia family in a town condo. Today's symposium, 100 Years of Solitude, a Curse upon Humanity, explores how solitude isn't just a personal struggle, but a force that shapes history, relationships, and entire communities. Before we begin, I'd like to walk you through the agenda for today's discussion. We'll start by defining solitude as not physical isolation, but as an emotional and existential condition. We'll explore how it appears in different forms: personal, generational, political, and even environmental. Next, we'll dive into the world of Kondo and examine how the characters live and respond to solitude. Through the Buendia family, we see how people internalize isolation, repeat its patterns, and mistakes it for destiny. Finally, we'll explore the consequences. What happens when solitude is an interrupted ordeal? With that, let's begin our first section. What is solitude, and in what ways does it transpire? We're all likely familiar with Disney's Frozen and Elsa's iconic song, Let It Go. The lyrics speaks of isolation, power, and emotional distance, a kingdom of isolation. This lyric is more than a play on words. It's a metaphor that mirrors the emotional and symbolic weight of solitude in 100 Years of Solitude. The ice evokes a recurring image from the novel, cold, distant, and untouchable, while kingdoms suggest an inescapable reign over the lives of those trapped in isolation. Ice is both fleeting and eternal, melting at the touch and capable of preserving time itself. It holds memory within its frozen stillness, suspending life in a way that almost feels magical. During Let It Go, Elsa experiences what seems like freedom. She finally embraces her powers, building her own ice palace high in the mountains. But this newfound control comes at a price. Her isolation is rooted in fear, fear of hurting others, fear of rejection, and fear of herself. So she retreats, not out of selfishness, but out of self-preservation. In Frozen, we see solitude as an individual experience, a personal burden Elsa carries. In Frozen, but this emotional distance begins to extend outward, becoming social isolation as she pushes away her sister, her kingdom, and her community. Much like Elsa, the Buendia family doesn't just suffer from solitude, they embody it. Their isolation, passed down from one generation to the next, begins as individual but grows in structural force, impacting everyone around them. Elsa's magical powers eventually turns into a prison. In Macondo, the same happens. What begins as magical eventually becomes tragic. As we continue our analysis, it's important to affirm that ices are the central symbol through which we are examining solitude. To help visualize the world of a novel, think of the setting of Encanto.
a magical colorful village in Latin America centered around an enchanted family. This is to no coincidence. Encanto draws heavily upon Marquez's work, particularly his use of magical realism and his Colombian heritage. But while Encanto uses magic to bring family and community together, the novel uses it to highlight disconnection and isolation.
So our thesis text, 100 Years of Solitude, is a novel written by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and it's about the Buendia family and their town Macondo. As the title suggests, the book is about the Buendia family spending about 100 years in complete isolation, with limited connections to the outside world. Macondo remains isolated because of its geographic location. It's surrounded by rainforests and mountains, and it's hard to physically reach. Due to this extreme isolation, the Buendia family commonly engages in incestuous relationships in order to continue their lineage. They continue these kinds of relationships until the feared prophecy of a child being born with a pig's tail deformity comes true. Later on in the novel, it's revealed that Macondo is colonized, leading to a deadly massacre, a loss of the town's identity, and political divide. Throughout the novel, history repeats itself, and we see that the Buendia family is unable to break their cycle of incestuous relationships and trauma, and no real friendships or healthy relationships are ever formed. So Jose Arcadio Buendia, the founder of Macondo and the patriarch of the Buendia family, is arguably one of the most important characters in the novel. He is initially introduced to ice and other technological advancements by his gypsy friend Melquiades, and Jose Arcadio Buendia grows obsessed with the pursuit of innovation. This obsession soon turns into madness and indirectly contributes to the disillusionment of their town, Macondo. The introduction of ice in Macondo is very significant. It's initially introduced as a harmless wonder, but later it's referenced multiple times through the text. It's used to signify the Buendia family's cyclical fate and the rise and fall of the town of Macondo. So our thesis is, while the rise and fall of the Buendia family and the town Macondo is rooted in solitude, it also acts as a structural force that shapes emotional, political, and ecological disconnection. Solitude is represented symbolically through ice in 100 Years of Solitude to portray the inevitable fate that the effects of isolation have on the town of Macondo and the Buendia family.
Marquez utilizes the style of magical realism when narrating the generations of the Buendia family, who represent the different forms of solitude that one takes when they face isolation and psychological alienation. Our presentation intends to demonstrate how isolation in a community evolves from just an individual experience to an inherited curse that reflects humanity's struggles with human connection and existentialism. Philosopher Paul M. Hedin writes, as a culture consists of individuals connected with each other through a psychic relatedness, the solitude of the individual becomes the solitude of a culture, of a striving humanity. The events in 100 Years of Solitude, however extreme, can be compared to humanity's failure of repeating history when discussing human progress. Even though all the individual characters experience solitude, these feelings of loneliness are often projected onto their forming relationships. Due to their lack of knowledge and contact with the outside world, the members of Macondo turn to each other to form some sort of companionship and escape. Others get lost in their own personal delusions and become a shell of their original selves. Colonel Aureliano Buendia, once a key military leader in Macondo, becomes disillusioned by his wartime experiences, leading him into deep isolation and emotional detachment. He copes by excessively crafting in his workshop a repetitive and symbolic act that reflects the novel's cyclical nature and his transformation into a mechanical, memory-less figure. Meanwhile, a character like Amaranta self-imposes her own solitude by rejecting love at every opportunity, missing opportunities for real romance. When she weaves her own shroud and embraces her own death, Amaranta is the only character who has a revelation about her solitude, acknowledging that her actions were influenced by an existential awareness of loneliness.
Perhaps the most disturbing coping mechanism that the characters exhibit throughout the novel is engaging in incest. Incest in 100 Years of Solitude is portrayed as a manifestation of the Buendia family's cyclical irreversible closed-mindedness and isolation. It represents the ultimate form of solitude, as it folds inwards instead of reaching outward towards genuine connection. Thus, the romantic relationships that form throughout the novel are anything but romantic. For example, gender-based violence often lurks beneath the surface of Marquez's plentiful metaphors and literary dressings, making it startlingly easy to overlook. Marquez aestheticizes this suffering on purpose, implying that this behavior is normal and encouraged. For example, Rebecca's sexual assault at the hand of Jose Arcadio is described in disturbingly sensual terms, like he, quote, grabbed her like a little bird. In this instance and many others, trauma is masked under the guise of passion. The relationship between Jose Arcadio and Rebecca, like most romantic ones in the novel, are also devoid of most qualities we recognize in romantic relationships today. In the male Buendia's eyes, a spouse is a mere object, available at his disposal in moments of need. It is rare to find a lengthy conversation between a married couple in the novel, or to find a man genuinely concerned about his wife and her passions. Although married, none of these couples are truly friends to start with.
Like Elsa's icy isolation, ice becomes a significant symbol in 100 Years of Solitude, along with Macondo being known as the City of Mirrors. Mirrors share the same physical characteristics as ice, for they're both reflective and translucent in nature. In fact, the idea of a city of mirrors was first introduced when Jose Arcadio Buendia has a dream in which he dreams of a house with mirror walls. This was after he discovered ice as well. Therefore, Macondo can also be considered a house of mirrors due to the fact that ice symbolizes. While ice is both translucent and While an ice cube is translucent, allowing an eye to look right through its physical form, both the readers and the Buendia family only learned of Arca's fate at the very end, which signifies the melting of ice. Due to nature's course, the melting of ice will inevitably melt, and when it does, it signifies the end of the story of 100 Years of Solitude. Although ice is presented a harmless wonder as we first mentioned, it soon turned into a symbol that reflects the broad themes of the effects of transformation and discovery on the community and the Buendia family. Aureliano Babylonia is the last Buendia family member who manages to decipher the parchments that detail the narrative of the Buendia family and the Curse of Solitude. Both his and the reader's realizations are too late because their fate had already been sealed, and Macondo was to be wiped away out of existence due to a prophecy. Thus, ice melting represents the end of their story and in the final stages of an inescapable fate. Once ice melts, one cannot reverse the natural cycle and turn the melted puddle back into its physical original form without some aid. Macondo, however, had no second chances because once the prophecies were deciphered, it was too late. As Marquez narrates the Buendia family, in 100 Years of Solitude, solitude becomes a curse that continues to get passed down in every generation. It is an inevitable fate for all the characters, despite the social, political, and environmental changes happening throughout the book. The solitude experienced by every character reflects their desires, obsessions, fears, and failures in the pursuit of human connection in an isolated society. However, Marquez not only presents solitude as an individual experience, but one that all of humanity struggles with, a psychological journey. Thank you for listening, and thank you for Mr. Siri and Professor Yusuf for their guidance. These are work projects.
Okay, one last round of applause for both of our presenting groups. What I would like to do now is get to some questions. So, does anybody have a question for either or both of our presenting groups? Dan, yeah.
For the second group, I use a lot about we use a lot of like ice, like not just with frozen, from isolation, but also with ice like a small term to show the melting cycle. Are you trying to like kind of show the idea that the cycle that they're kind of in like the cycle of like I guess like psychological trauma. I guess like the ice has shown that it's solely not away because of the solitude. Like, you know,
Yeah, so that's based, so ice kind of began as like a physical form. So throughout our presentation, we just want to like slowly show the gradual melting of the ice. And essentially like the melting of ice kind of represents like the fall and the doom of both like Macondo, the town, and like the family, where it's like once it melts, like that is the end. You can't really turn it back to ice without like helping like a mold, right? But for Macondo, like they already have like their fate sealed from the very beginning. So everything, all the events that happened throughout the book was just a result of the prophecy, and that's what we just wanted to show. I hope that answers your question.
thank you.
Any other questions? Lynn, I can kind of get to you. Yeah, I'll get to you.
So for the second group, mostly, I know there was a lot of things going on with the ice metaphor, but you guys mentioned how like in the beginning of your book, kind of how ice is also symbolic of solitude, correct? So as you said, once the ice melts, there's no true way to reverse it. But the ice melting wouldn't also be symbolic of the solitude melting, and how do you think that what's the family's name? How do you think the Buendia family can truly overcome their solitude if the melting of the ice is a fate that they couldn't overcome?
I guess I would say that their fate was prophesized from the beginning of the book. So no matter what they would have tried to do in those 100 years throughout those generations that existed through the novel, they're cursed to solitude. And I think the ice melting is kind of showing that. I think the ice melting is kind of showing how the cycle is prophesied it was supposed to happen, and I don't know if he meant that solitude would inevitably end, because I think he's referencing a broader sense of solitude within humanity as a whole. I think the solitude of the Buendia family ended because the family ended, but I think solitude in humanity is still very much present.
All right, thank you so much. Looking at the time, unfortunately, I just can't see us squeezing another question because you all have to get back to class. So thank you so much for attending this panel. And enjoy the rest of the day. Hopefully we'll see some of you back here for another panel later on today or tomorrow.
How hot? My mom had a good yesterday. What the hell? I take a big dead. Take a big dead. Okay, looks like you should take more than one quart in the line. Exactly. You never know if you can act over that. You want to be sitting here for like I don't think I like bagels. You like what's the next one? Like I saw your oh my gosh, like warming. My back. I tripped up too. Finally over. I got you. That ain't get like attention just you're right, it's like that people I guess like bro, look, I have 10 fingers for 10 girls at a time. And then like if you want my toe, I have like 20 girls. Yeah, I get a whole class. What? What do you mean, Tyler? Yeah. What if it rains? Wait, is it okay if I like sign and second that? I think I might do it. Yeah. Wait. I'll bring both. Wow. Are you making them? No, you're making. Oh. I don't know. I might get to keep it. Oh, wait, but that's gonna help my snacks to shade. No. Everyone's gonna run around. Wait, so we're going to small car. Oh, okay, thank the Lord. I'm not taking that piece on the tree. Hey, you can just the person's gonna stash it away before you bring it over. Yo, you're right, bro. You're violent. Just wait, so what part? That's up to you. Not that far. Like somewhere like this. Not casino. recommend the one that's up in college? I think it's Rachel. They live near there. It's a okay, you guys always play math hard. I don't know what that is, but that's still. I mean, we can. It's like 20 minutes. No, it's like 30 minutes. Yeah, and I'm like 45 minutes away from closing. Look at this, an hour and a half up there. Well, you guys are gonna do it math things, right? You're not gonna be doing it 8 a.m. No, let's not do it 8 a.m. No, I'm not pulling up with 8 a.m. I should have on the picnic ball. I should head over and probably bring your bed instead of food. Yeah, it's gonna be like not a blanket. Yes. What's the animal? I got it. Huh? You're gonna use me as a shield. You see, like, you hear one buzz and you're like, okay, let's come out. It's the bug with you. Yeah, we can do it together. Board games? You know how those board games? I have Game of Life, I have Monopoly, I have Scrabble, I have a lot, yeah. Sort of like a mad. Don't worry. You got it, bro. Don't play Monopoly. I'm gonna say, if you guys come over, to your house right now today? Three things left. Why you think you want to? No, I mean, I'm gonna sit on this. It's gonna be like those viral TikTok videos where I like flip over. I'm gonna crush her stuff. If I sit on her lap, she's gonna be like flattened. It's gonna be scoliosis, but from her legs. I'm gonna sit like this. And I'll sit on yours, Lana. You'll just like laying down on her legs. I'll sit like sleeping. And one last, oh yeah, yoga. I missed yoga. I'm making you relax. I'm making No, she's gonna win. Chris is gonna win. Chris is gonna win. If I don't win, I'm gonna flip this. Because he's got this. I don't want and I don't want you're gonna be like Mario. I don't even know where you're going.
Okay, everyone coming in, come all the way down, fill in every available seat. You're going to be pretty full on this one. All the way down. People at the top there, when they're walking over you, move all the way to the right. That would be ideal.
Oh my god.
All right, group 2 or 1, I got your slides. Trevor, I got the slides. All right, everybody find a seat. We're about to begin. All right, hello everybody. So we're gonna get started, and my name is Judah Rubin. I was so glad to be working with both of these groups that we're going to hear from in a second. We're going to be presenting on friendship in type scholars, ceasing migration to the north. And I just want to say that it was such a pleasure working with both these groups, right? And they are actually going to give us some presentations that complicate the idea of friendship in a post-colonial moment in Sudan in the early 1960s. And both of these groups really highlight some fascinating questions about the residual of British colonial hegemony as it overflows the very possibility of friendship. So let's see how they work that out. First up, we're going to hear from Leah Cruz. Today, Trevor Shoshi presented 3 Faces of a Wound: Power, Identity, and the Ghosts of Empire. So let's give them a warm round of applause.
Good afternoon, my name is Shira. My name is Layla. My name is Jada. And we will be discussing the echoes between world, brotherhood, hybridity, and broken power in the season of migration to the north. Before we begin our presentation, we'd like to define 3 key terms. Colonialism is a control and exploitation of one nation by another through settlement, economic dominance, or political rule. Hybridity refers to the mixing of cultures resulting from colonial encounters, and patriarchy is a social system where men hold primary power and dominate in both leadership, moral authority, and control.
Let's begin with the context of the story. The novel opens with a Sudanese man, an unnamed narrator, returning to his Nile-side village after studying in England. He is eager to reconnect with his homeland and live a quiet life. But things shift when he meets Mustafa Saeed, a charismatic man with a mysterious past. Over time, the narrator learns that Mustafa also studied abroad in England. But unlike the narrator, Mustafa lived a life of seduction, performance, and destruction. As a hyper-educated Sudanese man in London, Mustafa used the colonial feminization of African men. He seduced white British women by playing into their Orientalist fantasies. Mustafa says, I would read poetry, talk of religion and philosophy, discuss paintings, and say things about the spirituality of the East. I would do everything possible to entice a woman into my bed. But what seemed like conquest was actually a psychological collapse, shaped by the weight of colonialism and toxic masculinity. Several of the women he was involved with committed suicide. Mustafa killed his English wife, Jean Morris, and served time in English prison before returning to Sudan to start over. Mustafa's story is a tragic portrait of cultural hybridity gone wrong. He is neither fully Sudanese nor fully British, trapped between two identities shaped by two conflicting patriarchies. He states, I lived with them, chatted with them. We were together every day, but I never really knew them, nor did they know me. They, in this context, represent men in England. Sudanese culture views manhood through honor, lineage, and control, while British colonial masculinity exoticizes and objectifies the non-Western man. Mustafa, attempting to perform both, ends up performing none. The narrator, disturbed by Mustafa's story, begins to spiral into an identity crisis of his own. He becomes increasingly aware of how colonialism and patriarchy deform men, turning them into conquerors, victims, or both. Mustafa stated, I was neither a man of the East nor a man of the West. I was a hybrid. I had no roots, no past, and no future. The novel ends with the narrator nearly drowning in the Nile, symbolizing his immersion into and struggle against the same forces that destroyed Mustafa. Now that we have a little context on the book, here's our thesis. Mustafa Saeed's relationships with the Sudan migration to the north show how relationships become a place of power struggle under colonial influence. His desire for approval from British society forces him into an identity shaped by the very place that colonized his country, leading to his alienation.
So for some historical context, the novel was written in 1956 in northern Sudan during the post-colonial era while the First Sudanese Civil War was taking place. This is also a time period the book takes place in, with flashbacks from the 1930s in which Mustafa went to London to study. This was when Sudan was under the Anglo-Egyptian condominium, when regional tension between the north and the south began rising, eventually leading to the First and Second Sudanese Civil Wars. One colonial strategy was to give more power to the elites or certain regions to create divide and conquer. According to an article by NYU Politics Society, this conflict left a broken government structure and other diminishing effects, such as destroyed healthcare and sanitation systems. This process was the Southern policy, a strategy used to separate the urban north from the rural south by giving the north more attention. The north was mostly Muslim, while the south was mostly Christian. According to David Lynn, it was said to prevent one region from going past it was said to prevent the values and culture from the north from spreading to the south, and also to prevent the north from taking more control over the south. Here's a contemporary piece of literature that has a similar concept to Southern policy. In the movie Do the Right Thing, multiple marginalized races coexist in tension forming, and those of one race consider those of the other races more advantaged or successful, leading to jealousy and tension, as evidenced in the following explanation. Okay, well, this isn't here, but similar to how in the movie, one group is jealous of the other, even though they were both marginalized by the system. The northern and southern Sudan were both colonized, yet the seeming disparity of one group over the other led to conflict between regions instead of against the colonizer. A lot of Mustafa's actions were shaped from his purchase of being colonized, and he expresses frustration at being colonized. He says, the fact that they came to our land, does that mean we should poison our present and future? Regardless of this frustration, when speaking about his ideal future for Sudan, he said, we'll speak their language without a sense of guilt or gratitude, showing how a piece of the colonizer will always remain just as it has remained in him.
So the North was characterized as adaptive based on British influence on the North, and the South could be characterized as conventional based on its tendency to hold on to traditional values. Mustafa possessed characteristics of both the North and the South. By marrying Jean Morris and using his exotic identity to pursue women in Europe, he was able to adapt to England in a way. Another evidence of him adapting is the way he carried himself and spoke the way of an Englishman. However, he was also able to adapt back into Sudanese society to an extent, holding on to some traditional values, as evidenced in him marrying Hosna and choosing a village life like the one he grew up in over an urban lifestyle, regardless of living in the more economically developed way.
Let's look at this through a patriarchal view, specifically through what Mustafa himself was experiencing. He grew up and returned to society where men held power over women. This is clear in the quote, "Women belong to men, and a man's a man even if he's decrepit." Even after death, Mustafa controls Hosna's fate by reordering her remarriage. This leads her to be harassed by an old man named Wad, who she ultimately killed before taking her own life. What's horrifying is that Mustafa's control over Hosna continues even from beyond the grave. Literary scholar Hassan Wali points out that Mustafa Saeed's sexual conquests are not merely personal, they are a broader critique of colonial and patriarchal notions of gender. In England, Mustafa plays into the fantasy of the exotic other, weaponizing how women fetishize him. But after killing Jean Morris, it becomes clear this isn't just personal. It's a symbolic act of dominance against a society that colonizes people and turned him into what he calls an unrecognizable monster. Now, to understand this in a more modern term, think of the Barbie movie. When Barbie enters the real world, she's objectified and lost. Now, flip it. Imagine an intense point.
Doesn't seem to matter what I do. I'm always number two. No one knows how hard I tried. I have feelings that I can't explain. Driving me insane. For my life being so polite, but I'll sleep alone tonight.
In this scene, Chen says that he is second to Barbie in Barbie. This mirrors exactly how Mustafa might have felt invisible in England. However, in the second scene,
We got rid of them. Great work out
Expectations, good stuff. So I'm not worried about it. Not now, Margaret. Let's shake on this.
based on the second scene, we can see that Chen is shocked but quickly embraces patriarchy. Just like Mustafa, who upon seeing his objectification by English women starts to manipulate and dehumanize them in return. Both Chen and Mustafa reshape their identities in reaction to the power structures around them, leading to his alienation with respect to colonialism and patriarchy, tying it into our present hybridity. The idea of hybridity is discussed further by Leighton Adair, who supports the idea that the hybrid and fragmented identities of some of these characters are the outcome of center-periphery encounters. Enduring a sense of dislocation, the unnamed narrator and Mustafa find themselves marginalized by community and placed in an in-between space of cultural hybridity. Mustafa's lack of a steady place to call home throughout his childhood steers him towards an identity crisis. He felt no connection towards his own culture, and on his journey, learns and mimics the ways of British life. He uses this blend of culture to play into two different roles, one where he describes himself as a thirsty desert, the wilderness of southern desires, and one as a sophisticated British man. His whereabouts actions are interpreted by these European women. He plays into them, lying about his past, who he is, creating fabricated stories that align with what women want to hear. The quote, "My bedroom became a theater of war, and my bed had to tell" from the novel, showcases how Mustafa is playing a character. He's creating a colonial fantasy. He plays the role of the colonizer, mimicking her actions with the women he entices, but he is still playing the role of the colonized, hypersexualizing himself and feeding into the titles he was given by the colonists. To play both roles, he needs to attach himself to the other, causing a constant jerk from both sides. His fusing of identities creates a toxic, self-destructive crime that Mustafa uses as a form of reverse colonialism. Ultimately, his plan fails because he cannot reach his goal of revenge without destroying half of who he's supposed to be. The quote above says, "I was alone. I was not alone in this struggle." Mustafa Saeed's story is the story of all of us, of the generations torn apart by the legacies of the colonial past. Mustafa and the narrator serve as parallels of each other, struggling to determine where they truly belong and who they really are. Aligning yourself to a certain culture or country is crucial to one's identity, something that our two main characters lack. This isolation leads to the main character down a destructive path of fate and Mustafa cannot escape. To conclude, season of migration to the north reveals that colonialism is not just a political takeover, it's a psychological one. Mustafa Said's hybridity is born from the colonial experience. He's molded by the West but haunted by Sudan. Yet this hybridity doesn't just come from the unkind, it's complicated by patriarchy. Mustafa doesn't just adopt Western ideals to weaponize them, especially against women, to reclaim a sense of power to this colonialism stole. In doing so, he embodies a fractured identity, both victim and perpetrator. Tully shows us that it's not one system, but the entanglement of colonialism and patriarchy that drives Mustafa's inner conflict. And through that, we're left with a larger question. Can a person ever truly escape the systems that made them? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think some of these questions might be answered or also posed by the group coming up next, which is Vera Ramzada, Nashra Patel, and Matthew Williams. They're going to be presenting us with the exploitation of the mind, colonial power, education, and identity in the season of migration to the north. Let's give them a round of applause.
Good afternoon. Today we'll be presenting the exploitation of the mind in the season of migration to the north.
What if your mind wasn't really your own? What if the way you act, speak, love, and learn was actually shaped by authority disguised as opportunity?
That's exactly what we are exploring today. To understand this, we need to provide some context. Our presentation revolves around our thesis text, The Season of Migration to the North, which takes place in the 1960s. And it is important to note that Sudan was colonized by Britain from 1899 to 1956. This book provides the reader with a post-colonial view of Sudan and the lasting impacts of colonialism on those colonized. Mustafa Said, the protagonist, grows up without a father and is raised for a brief period by an emotionally distant mother before he moves in with a white couple to pursue higher education. His education path leads to England, where he engages in multiple sexual relations with white women, seducing them and eventually leading to the death of four of them. After serving time in prison, he returns to Sudan, where he seems to have a normal, respectable life. Mustafa reveals to the narrator the traumatic impacts of colonialism on his life and identity. As for our thesis, European colonial values were imposed in Sudanese schools and institutions, ultimately fostering values of patriarchal dominance and power in Mustafa Said's development and future relationships.
In order to grasp how Mustafa was impacted, it's necessary to understand the structure of British colonialism in Sudan. One of the clearest examples comes when he recalls how a man plays his fluency in English. When Mustafa reflects on the conflict, he explains that he had to learn to be eloquent in it through perseverance because English was not his language. So, he gets rewarded by his white peers for his quick adoption of their values. However, he never truly feels at home at Europe despite being somewhat welcomed by his peers. Mustafa did embrace European culture, but he didn't completely abandon his Sudanese roots. Homi Bhabha, a scholar and literary critic, might describe Mustafa's behavior as a result of mimicry. Mimicry, colonized people respond to mimicry as a form of surviving in a foreign environment. Mimicry helps Southern Sudanese population get tolerated by the British colonizers and advance in hope for a better life. However, it makes colonized people unsure about their cultural identity by forcing them to reconcile opposing beliefs rather than fully embracing their Sudanese or European identity. They feel trapped as though they belong to neither. Mustafa externalized his lack of cultural identity by taking what he felt as revenge on colonialism through sexual conflicts. Though mimicry is one of the main causes for his dysphoria, he utilized it to deliver vengeance. For example, a part of his plan was to decorate his bedroom with a den of lies so he could exploit British women's fetishes of African stereotypes. These lies were based on stereotypes of Africans that portrayed the Sunnis as mystical people. He mimics these stereotypes and fulfilled his victims' fantasies in order to lure them into his trap. While his plans were successful, they were also fruitless because they only reinforced the European portrayal of Sudan. He further loses his cultural identity because he continues to replicate these caricatures. Mimicry led Mustafa Said to be uncertain about his identity by leading him to hold two opposing sets of beliefs and did little damage to the bigger picture.
Now that we understand colonialism as a larger system of control, we can take a look at one of its most powerful tools, education. It is clear that British schools in Sudan were never designed to uplift the Sudanese people. Instead, they were meant to reshape them. The novel shows how the local people were aware of the damage these schools could do. Parents feared that the children would be taken away not just physically, but also culturally. Mustafa didn't have anyone to protect him in this way, and therefore he was pulled fully into a system that trained him to think and act like a colonizer. The curriculum aimed to transform Mustafa into a version of a civilized man, one who acted, spoke, and thought like a European. This kind of education led Mustafa to see Sudan as a place to leave behind, and Europe as a place where real success blossomed. Showcasing the success as a student ultimately positioned him to be a symbol of colonial education. For example, Linda Chen notes that colonial systems used exceptional students like Mustafa as the evidence of the usefulness of colonization. He wasn't seen as someone who succeeded on his own. He was seen as someone who succeeded as a result of the colonial system.
Wow, Meshwa, you're actually pretty smart for a high school student.
We've all experienced a backhanded compliment like that at least once in our lives. This is the twisted concept of exceptionality, exactly like what Mustafa Said experienced. He was considered exceptional, however, one can only be exceptional if the norm is less than. This means that since Mustafa was exceptionally smart, that it conveys that other Sudanese boys were uneducated based on Western views and therefore less smart. The idea of exceptionalism comes from the ability to process and internalize the European values presented to students in colonial institutions. It conveys that a combination of these factors directly led to an identity crisis, and specifically in his masculinity. His education enabled him to gain access to elite European society, but it also twisted his concept of intimacy. As we later learned, his relationship with Jean Morris, a British woman who refused to be controlled, ends in violence. Salih is showing us that colonial education didn't just distort his identity, it warped his ability to love and connect. Salih uses these themes to show how colonial trauma can twist someone's view of gender and relationships. His behavior ends up reinforcing the Western stereotype of this hypersexual black man, rather than breaking free from it. Yet again, instead of escaping colonial ideas, he becomes another example of them. So what began as praise for his intellect became a performance of power. Education gave Mustafa status, but took away his roots. And without these roots, his identity began to crumble.
Saleh doesn't portray Mustafa's life as just a tragic story. It's more than that. It's a reflection of the deeper psychological damage colonialism leaves behind. From the beginning, Mustafa is emotionally disconnected, and that emotional detachment becomes the foundation of his fractured identity. Scholars like Farwane and John argue that his early emotional deprivation creates a psychological void, which later drives him to mimic colonial patterns of control and dominance. One of the earliest signs of this emotional numbness appears in Mustafa's memory of leaving his mother. The language in this quote is stripped of warmth. It's not a mother and a child parting, it's two strangers. This lack of affection becomes a defining part of who Mustafa is. Without emotional grounding, he struggles to form meaningful connections and becomes more vulnerable to the influences of colonial education. According to scholars, early separations like these often lead to long-term issues with emotional regulation and intimacy in adulthood. We see the blending of intimacy and dominance even in Mustafa's first sexualized memory at age 12. This here is not just a moment of attraction. It's a moment overwhelmed by unfamiliarity and power. The woman is European. Her body, her smell, it all represents something foreign and dominant. This early experience lays the groundwork for how Mustafa sees intimacy, not as a connection, but as a conquest. As Jamshid points out, moments like these create a divided identity and colonize individuals, leaving them caught between cultures and unsure of where they belong. As he rises through the ranks of British academia, Mustafa doesn't just succeed.
He sheds parts of himself. This becomes clear when the narrator visits his home and notices not a single Arabic book. That absence says a lot. Mustafa isn't just educated in the West. He's been rewritten by it. Even after returning to Sudan, he doesn't reconnect with his roots. Togolese uses branched this theory to argue that Mustafa represents a self-altering intellect, someone who seems to challenge the empire but still operates within its mindset. Mustafa's desire for control becomes most destructive in his relationships. Although this is a disturbing line, it reveals how deeply colonial logic has shaped his thinking. He's convinced that domination and sexual acts can somehow undo political oppression, but what he's really doing is copying the same system he claims to resist. Fanon famously said that the colonized subject is a persecuted man who is forever dreaming of becoming the persecutor. That perfectly describes Mustafa. His relationship with Jean Morris shows how this need for power unravels him. Mustafa isn't simply looking for his next match. He's looking for his next victim. Jean Morris is the only woman who doesn't yield to him, and in the end, he kills her. According to Tarwanet and John, this murder represents the final expression of Mustafa's internalized colonial violence, what Freud would call his death throw. Togolese argues that even after the colonizer is gone, the effects of colonialism continue, etched into individuals' minds and community dynamics, resulting in Mustafa's distorted identity. Salih's novel isn't just one about a man's downfall. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when the tools of empire don't just conquer land, but also the human psyche.
European colonialism in the season of migration to the north operates not just through political rules, but through deep psychological transformation. British institutions, especially schools, redefined what it meant to be intelligent, successful, and masculine. Mustafa Said, shaped by the system, becomes the model colonial subject, brilliant, eloquent, and westernized, yet internally fractured. His elite education erased his cultural grounding, forcing him to mimicry instead of belonging. Lacking emotional roots and identity, Mustafa replaces connection with control, weaponizing intimacy and embracing the very dominant colonialism taught him. So, what does this all mean? Colonialism shaped him, education molded him, but the result is a man that doesn't belong anywhere. Thank you. This is our work session.
Thank you very much. Both of these groups, you are pretty smart for high school students, I guess. But I'm sure there are also some smart questions out there. So why don't we open the floor to questions? I see a hand over there, and we'll come around and hand us some microphone.
Hello, this is Andy. First of all, wow, this is loud. First of all, both groups did absolutely amazing. You guys had a great presentation. And I actually have a question for both of you guys because I feel like both of your presentations kind of intertwined within each other a lot. The idea of, not just the idea of colonialism affecting like sexual perception, like the sexual perception of men. How do you think, to the extent of like modern day, how do you think this idea of colonialism shaping like men or even just shaping people in general, how do you think this idea of colonialism shapes people to this day in the sense of like the superiority, whoa, okay. As I was saying,
I'm not gonna use the mic this time. As I was saying, how do you think this idea of this book, like the idea of colonialism affecting not just the perception or the perception of people in general? How do you think this represents society to this day in the sense that colonialism to this day affects the idea of the development of specific ideologies between certain individuals of either ethnic or either ethnic, racial, or sexual identities?
Great question. So, for how this idea affects people today, this shows how, when colonized nations leave their colonies, it doesn't leave the colonized nation the same, because for this extended period of time, they were made to be dependent on their colonizer. So once they leave, now they have to try to build themselves up again into being independent, rather instead of being dependent on their colonizer. So it causes this political turmoil within the people in that nation because of political, maybe there's tend to be civil wars, it's questions on how to actually handle these new issues that they haven't dealt with before, if they should go back to their roots, if they should keep some of the values that they did get from the colonizers. So it causes problems like that, and it causes turmoil like that.
I also want to add on, modern day, think about the patriarchy and how it might not be through colonialism, but currently there are ideas being embedded into minds through schools, through institutions, and some people think that, oh, it's normal, it's what it's supposed to be. But that's all a result of the ideas that are being, the exploitation of the mind, the ideas that are being put into their minds.
In terms of how it impacts people now or today, for Sudan specifically, the civil wars were going on for a while. Meanwhile, it got worse in 2010 or more recently. So it shows how, regardless of how these colonial ideologies have been there for a while, it only gets worse. And an example is like recently. And also, not just colonialism, you asked about like how it impacts people today. I just wanted to say about the concept of hybridity. A lot of people here are like, let's say immigrants or the children of immigrants. We kind of have like an identity split or like hybridity amongst ourselves. Like some people have said, some people have the idea that like, oh, they're too like American for their home countries, meanwhile too American for their home country, meanwhile too like much of their too foreign for here. So in terms of that, that's also another way how it can impact us today.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Hello. Do you guys think the sexual nature of Mustafa comes from more of the colonial influences or like the subconscious attempt to restore his traditional Sudanese background?
Alright, we'll start with that. So I definitely think that it was the latter that you stated, mainly because Mustafa is in such like a mental state where he's trying to prove that he is the dominant one in the relationships and that he is the man. Mainly because during the argument between him and his wife Jean, he ends up killing her, even though it was sort of like a tangle between the two. And that's mainly just showing that he's trying to dominate in the relationship and with every other one of his relationships too. He's trying to come out on top and prove, no, I'm the man of the household, I take care of you, it's all on me. So I definitely say that he's trying to prove his like Sudanese culture that he comes out on top rather than the woman in the household.
Also, in a lot of their arguments with Jean and him, the idea of colonization does get mentioned. Like, we talk about, like, once Jean said something like, oh, I can uncolonize Sudan, or so she gave herself more power, or like said something in relation to Sudan, like giving herself more power. So a lot of the arguments were like referred to colonialism.
The specific quote was that I am the colonizer, you're the colonized. That's what she said.
think we might have time for one more.
How did the
Okay, everybody quiet. Do you want to ask your question just out loud without the microphone?
Well, to answer your question to the best of my ability, I would say that it wasn't something that the colonizers, they knew, they had all this foresight. But instead, it was more so small steps that they were trying to take so that they could still get what they wanted, and that's what the end product tended to be. Because for colonialism, the goal of Britain or other colonized nations, they wanted resources, they wanted control, they wanted the people, they wanted the labor, they wanted the resources. So they, at first, it was just, force them with weapons, that sort of sort. But then, as time developed and as circumstances changed, they still tried to maintain that while still keeping up with the changes of politics. So when there was discourse and rebellion amongst these colonized nations, they had to use other ways to actually still maintain their resources while not losing their control. And they could have done that with education and colonialism and actually educating these people so that they could think that way without necessarily realizing it immediately. So it was a gradual process, I'd say.
I also want to add on that when they were colonizing Sudan, they never really thought about the after effects of it. This book is about the post-colonial view of colonization, but their main goal was to just colonize, get the resources, get the labor, get the people, and they were never really thinking about, oh, what happens when so-and-so rebels. They were just thinking about, I want it.
Okay, thank you so much. Quick, we have to be quick because we've got to finish.
We're out of time.
Oh, we're out of time. Okay, sorry. We're out of time. Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you for
And I was like, news is society. Wait, that's from months? Oh, you don't know. It's not me. Yeah. Does it go with the music? They stick the pencil into the HDMI. Right? When it starts smoking, it's time for me to And it's in the USB port. How did they find out? Mandy Lynn, what is that? What are you wearing? Are you doing it today? Are you now? You're so cute. Oh my god, good luck. It was $500. He's giving out 1,000. Oh, I thought we only get 500.
I'm still here. You're here the whole time? That's
There's a camera on. No! Okay, but you be fighting. My bad. This is all your feelings. Oh, I am. Oh, no, oh. What's up? I'm so excited. Would you like shirt? It's gonna be like, if we're going to Six Flags, I don't need Can you move over one? No, no, no. Much better in Russian. I lost it. I've been in the game. I've been telling you. I have my generation mom and manager on the way. On a daily basis, and then my husband is On Wednesday, we were at Pete. Wait, is that your camera? They gotta turn around.
Are you ready to start? Okay, we're just waiting another minute or two, but please, if you're in this room, please respect the room and respect the presenters. So no chit chat, eating, and all kinds of rustling, and certainly no stuff left on the floor. Thank you. All right, so we're ready to start. So welcome to the final band of the day with our first day of the Humanities Symposium. You guys are in for a treat, two great presentations. Right, our first presentation is H.A. Gonzalez, Philip Kinsell, Leslie Lynn, and Ryan, who are presenting It's Not a Fashion Statement, It's a Death Wish. Triumph and Succumbrance to Trauma Through Adolescent Relationships in Hamlet and the Ghost of Being a Wallflower. Our second presentation is Alice Valacorba, Gabby Dai, Jenny Huang, Maggie Lin, and Mira Servania, presenting Ordinary Friends, Shipwrecked by Society, Deception, and Fluid Desires and False Night. So we're going to have both presentations first, and then at the end we will take questions for both. So please help me welcome our first set today.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing today? I know it's been a long day. You guys happy? Yeah! Awesome! Okay, that's what I like to hear. Okay. Hello and welcome everyone to the 2025 Humanities Symposium. But don't get too comfortable because we're taking a short trip back to the early 2000s to introduce It's Not a Fashion Statement, It's a Death Wish, exploring the role of friendship on trauma in literature across time. This title stems from a song on the 2004 My Chemical Romance album, 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge, and we'd like to play another iconic anthem from that album for you all today. As you watch and listen, think of some words you use to describe the song and video and what we're wearing today as a whole. Okay, can we get some hands? What kind of word did you use to describe this? You over there?
Yeah, I would like to describe this song and video like it's very dramatic and like also like it has like a lot of words for love and romance.
Yes, love, romance, drama, the dramatics of it all. You over there? Passionate, yes. What else? Yeah, Daniel, go for it. Art. Art? That's also pretty good. Brian, what do you think?
I think it's pretty cringy.
Cringy! That's such a... Oh, so, Thomas?
I hear lots of noise, but I don't hear any lyrics.
There's all this angst and drama to it, you know? It's like pretty negative connotation to it. We add to it, but how... Okay. But let me subvert your expectations here. What is not widely known is that this song was written by Gerard Way as a coping mechanism for the loss of his grandmother. Sometimes we dismiss these things and leave them with a label like angsty or dramatic, but it's so important to look deeper. An outward display of what some may call cringy could mean everything to someone desperate to be heard. Brian.
So, this idea impacts our study of literature, and specifically we examined Prince Hamlet from the Shakespeare play Hamlet and Charlie Calmucus from the 1999 young adult novel The Perks of Being a Wallflower, two boys who embody the themes of Helena. Now, externally, their emotions seem over the top and dramatic, but in reality, they're just two teenagers navigating society that work against them to overcome their traumatic pasts. So our studies of these characters led us to an interesting conclusion, which through analyzing the trauma experienced by Hamlet and Charlie, the friendships that people form, and the psychoanalytic theories that explain them and their relevance to their age range, we do conclude that the works of fiction do utilize their genres to prove that the key to emerging resilient from adolescent trauma is friendships that are built from foundations of empathy, understanding, and shared experiences.
Here's the order in which we will prove our thesis. We will first explore the trauma our characters face. This will lay the foundation for why the authors choose to add collaborate as a crucial part of both stories. Then, we'll explore the friendships both characters have in their respective stories and why they succeed or don't succeed, backed up by the research of psychoanalytic theories. Finally, we'll explain why this all matters, both to us and to all of you. Let's begin. First, we need to examine the trauma of these characters solely. Hamlet is a young prince in Denmark who's grieving the loss of his beloved father. His mother and uncle get married almost immediately after, and despite how traumatic all of this is, everyone around Hamlet insists that he should just get over it. He is shortly after haunted by his father's ghost, who reveals that his uncle murdered him in cold blood and begs Hamlet to avenge him. What follows is a 5-act play in which Hamlet feigns insanity in the grand scheme to reveal his uncle's sins to the public. Similarly, we shift to Charlie in a different time period. Charlie is an incoming high school freshman who has always struggled with his mental health all his life, despite coming from a loving family. Though timid and scared, a group of similarly troubled couple ask him adopt him to their friend group. Charlie frequently mentions his love on Helen, thinking it's his fault that she died. But it's later revealed to us that Charlie's struggles stem from repressed memories of Aunt Helen sexually assaulting him as a child.
What we find interesting to us is that both authors, all the way from the 1600s to the present day, use a literary technique of breaking the fourth wall, which creates an audience-character relationship. In these stories highlighting trauma and loneliness, characters speaking to the audience tell us that they're desperate for a friendship that others may already have. By breaking the fourth wall, the authors prove that the human need for friendship is so strong that it transcends the barrier between fiction and reality. Hamlet speaks to the audience through soliloquies made into the stage play genre where no other on-stage character can hear him. He exclaims, "Now I am alone. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave I am," allowing him to bask in his sadness without judgment. However, Perks is an epistolary novel, which is full of letters, where each letter starts with "Dear friend," and he mentions writing because, according to him, he just needs to know that somebody out there listens and understands and doesn't try to sleep with people, even if they have. By breaking the fourth wall, it's embedded to both the stage play and epistolary genres of literature, depicting emotionally reliant characters takes full advantage of these genres. So, we've established that both characters break the fourth wall to gain a much-needed relationship. However, there is a crucial, and we mean crucial, discrepancy in Charlie and Hamlet's journeys. Perks ends in Charlie's newfound path to healing among friends, whereas Hamlet ends in bloodshed and tragedy for all, including the titular character himself. What caused Charlie and Hamlet's healing journey to diverge? What caused Charlie and Hamlet's healing journey to diverge in such drastic ways? And can an audience character relationship truly replace a friendship based in reality?
We determined that the answer to this question depends on how the relationship is used. Charlie uses his relationship with the audience as a stepping stone towards finding real friends, utilizing the confidence and skills built by speaking to the audience and applying them to his high school life. The relationship is warm and encourages him to achieve greater things. However, Hamlet's relationship with the audience is more so a dead end. His soliloquies to the audience come from a place of desperation for someone to understand him, which doesn't allow him to flourish in real-life relationships, especially because there is genuinely no one in Hamlet's world who has gone through what he has. Harking back to Kirk's, there is a turning point in the story where Charlie's crush, Sam, reveals to him that she was sexually assaulted as a child. Charlie's memories of his own experience are still repressed at this point, but he feels much closer to her, and they even share a kiss afterwards. In our research of trauma and literature, we discovered that shared trauma, whether between two characters or character audience, conveys that, quote, they're not alone, that their inability to make sense of such a painful and complex situation is universal. Knowing this, even though he doesn't realize it yet, Charlie's feelings have been validated by Sam and her experience, which begins to break away at the emotional barrier around him. At the end of the book, when Charlie is admitted to the mental hospital, he notes that his friends always visited him and helped him on his road to recovery. This wouldn't have been possible if Charlie hadn't broken the fourth wall and gained the confidence to find friends that shared his trauma. Though there were bumps on the journey, Charlie used all the resources available to him equally to strive towards a healthier mindset and a happier quality of life.
However, Hamlet is not so fortunate. Scholar Danielle Davis thinks that Hamlet's display of family was simply an both excess talent, and has alienation from those around him stemmed from being both too logical to continue to carry out his social functions. His intelligence renders him isolated in the society in which he lives, causing him to be shunned and even mocked for his skills, notably by a man named Colonialism, who disregards Hamlet's emotions because of his age. As a result of not being understood, Hamlet's soliloquies to the audience creates an echo chamber. Hamlet wants his thoughts to be challenged early on, but his wish goes unfulfilled due to being ridiculed for his emotions. Even his best friend Horatio, who was always by his side when the question of his father, could never understand what Hamlet was going through. In a close reading of Horatio's line, quote, "Towards who consider too curiously to consider so," examining the word towards too curiously suggests that Horatio finds Hamlet's perceived rambling to be superfluous because of how much he logically thinks. Even so, by the time Horatio can challenge Hamlet's thoughts, Hamlet is too far gone. His relationship with the audience was a dead end that left him to retain his own unhealthy mindset. These conclusions we've drawn about Charlie and Hamlet are supported by psychological studies in real life. The relational cultural theory, RCT, built on the early works of psychoanalyst John Miller, places emphasis on relationships built on meaningful connections as anchors for personal growth and well-being. Charlie benefits from breaking the fourth wall, using the relationship to form real connections with similarly troubled peers. This mirrors the core idea of RCT. On the contrary, Hamlet validates the theory from a negative. His treatment of the fourth wall as a dead end leaves him with no meaningful relationships and therefore no anchor points for his growth or personal well-being. Thus, he falls into madness. Hamlet and Charlie's contrast highlights how the presence or absence of authentic connections can affect a person's response to trauma.
Charlie and Hamlet's experiences being rooted in psychology leads us to our final point. Why does this even matter? This symposium topic as a whole is especially important to us as high school students because despite both works of literature being written before the 21st century, the themes they convey are still relevant today. In a 2023 CDC study on American high school students, it was reported that 39.7% of students experienced feelings of sadness and hopelessness, and 9.5% of students had attempted suicide, among other alarming numbers. Isolation and feelings of otherness affect adolescents worldwide, and for all you know, could affect the people sitting next to you here today. Having gone through the intricacies of trauma and the need for relationships, we return to the lines of My Chemical Romance's Helena. Can you hear me? Are you near me? We have now learned that this is far from just an angsty emo song. What we see here is a young man looking to the world for a connection. Someone who learns what both Hamlet and Charlie knew and experienced. Above all, we need each other. Literature across time continues to represent us all. Teenage angst is not to be ignored, not by our peers, and especially not by the adults we rely on, no matter how it expresses itself. Everyone deserves to be heard. We can't break the fourth wall of our existence, so it is important, more than ever, to connect with others and build healthy, supportive relationships. We hope that you carry this sentiment in your hearts for years to come. This is our work cited. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Mr. Reach, Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Russell. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we're going to have our second presentation, so if you have any questions, jot them down.
I have a question for you guys. Have you ever loved a friend?
Well, I have.
This isn't about you?
Well, they kind of did. So, in our presentation, we are going to explore how the rigid gender expectations designated by patriarchal norms effectively repress the potential for deeper connection between individuals, allows deception to flourish, and hinders the embracing of authentic identity.
William Shakespeare's Twelfth Night tells the story of Prince Sebastian and Viola separated by a shipwreck, and assuming that the other has drowned. Viola disguises herself as Cesario, a male, and he works for Duke Orsino, who loves Olivia. However, Olivia falls for Cesario, and because he falls for Cesario, like he didn't know that Viola was actually a female, and then because of that, with Sebastian's arrival and love triangles, it gives rise to confusion, leading to a number of marriages.
Throughout history, class differences have driven countless stories, real and fictional, and Twelfth Night is no exception. Viola's disguise allows her emotional closeness with Orsino, blurring the line between servant and companion. Orsino's platonic affection suggests romantic interest, but it's only when Viola's nobility is revealed that their love becomes acceptable. Malvolio's storyline, Stuart to Olivia, mirrors this tension in a different angle. His desire to marry her is less about love and more about upward mobility. But unlike Viola, his ambitions are ridiculed and ultimately crushed, representing middle-class aspiration and its ultimate extinguishing. But what happens if you don't even exist on societal standings? Festi, the court fool, lives in a liminal space. Part of the household, but never fully in it, and uses his wit and humor to expose the absurdities of the upper class, critiquing without consequence. But at the play's end, Festi sings of life's harsh realities, a bittersweet contrast to the noble characters' happy endings. While others find resolution, Festi stays the same, always present, always wise, but never allowed to truly belong with anyone as a friend, companion, or otherwise. Bless you. And as is with Shakespearean comedies, the romantic complications are all resolved at the end, but not by the dissolution of social boundaries, but by their restoration. Viola resumes her nobility, and Malvolio is banished. Sebastian marries Olivia not as a commoner, but as a restored noble. The play doesn't actually permit cross-class romantic or friendly satisfaction. It only permits the illusion of it. The disorder is humorous, but it is ultimately controlled by the line that it seeks to define. All of these characters forever trapped in the liminal space of societal constraints. Let's look at these relationships further.
So, what is the patriarchy's effect on romantic and platonic relationships? Patriarchy is a social system where men control a disproportionately large share of social, economic, political, and religious power. Romantic relationships are emotional and passionate, involving love and intimacy. Platonic relationships or friendships involve trust and mutual respect without any romantic or sexual attraction. So, why do we treat these two types of relationships differently? Well, patriarchy shapes how relationships are formed and how they're perceived. This brings us to Orsino. Orsino is a character who fully embodies patriarchal ideals. From the start, he is consumed by his idea of winning Olivia's love. His obsession of her is less about real connection and more about asserting his societal position. However, his relationship with Cesario complicates things. Orsino bonds deeply with Cesario, forming a genuine friendship, but is unable to accept his feelings for him as anything more than friendship because of his gender. However, when Viola reveals her true identity as a woman, Orsino can suddenly express his feelings for her without threatening his masculinity and societal position. Orsino's emotional connection with Cesario was limited by his patriarchal mindset. He could only allow himself to truly love Viola once her gender conformed to society's expectations. This moment reinforces how patriarchal norms define love as strictly heterosexual and rooted in traditional gender roles.
Let's talk about two best friends, Antonio and Sebastian. Antonio becomes emotionally attached and devoted to Sebastian, which is pretty unusual in a relationship that is labeled as friendship. On the other hand, Sebastian is numb and does not respond back to Antonia's affection. He shifts his focus to Olivia because his freedom of expressing love to the same gender as him is infringed. So Sebastian's sexual orientation is limiting him to have a romantic relationship with Antonio. A person's sexual identity can either build or break a relationship. Today, we are able to be friends with or even have a romantic relationship with any gender. But back in the day, during Shakespeare's time, it wasn't the same. Though their relationship showed possible pure aspects, scholars ignored it due to social norms of Shakespeare's time. So, did the pure aspects in 12th Night go unexplored? No, thanks to our modern scholars, because they have explored it and concluded that since 12th Night is a play in the 17th century, their relationship did not go beyond platonic terms. But in the 21st century, with all our non-traditional norms, it is considered as a homosexual pure relationship. This leads us to the big question. Can you be friends with someone who you are romantically attracted to? No. Human desires are stormy and uncontrollable. If those same feelings aren't reciprocated back by a friend, it can cause great emotional pain and possible friendship breakups too. Since Sebastian didn't feel the same way and didn't reciprocate the same feelings back to Antonio, Antonio is now left emotionally hurt, unfulfilled, and broken. So, friendships can be shipwrecked by sexual attraction.
Traditionally, men are expected to initiate romance while women are portrayed as passive recipients. This trope implies that same-gender relationships are nothing more than friendships because there is no balance of initiator and recipient. A romance between two women especially seems impossible because there is no man to even initiate a romantic bond. However, in 12th Night, Olivia and Viola reveal the potential for romance between women. Viola, disguised as Cesario, seduces Olivia only after abandoning Orsino's script and instead projecting her own feelings for Orsino, showing that women too can take an active and passionate role in romance. Moreover, by pursuing Olivia, Viola assumes what patriarchy considers a man's job and destabilizes the binary structure of patriarchal relationships. Then, after meeting Viola in her disguise, Olivia gives her a ring. Often tied to intense acts of love, this ring shows Olivia's initiative in consolidating this possibly romantic relationship. It is also the norm for a man to propose, underscoring the idea that Olivia assumes a masculine role and demonstrates that a man is not required to initiate or maintain romance. The dynamic between these two women reflects Renaissance scientist Johann Weyer's idea that although women are feminine in actuality, they are masculine in potentiality. But what defines masculinity and femininity? Viola abandons her feminine clothing after the shipwreck and wears masculine clothes as Cesario. She is treated as a man by society, and despite having feminine facial features, until she receives her feminine clothes back at the end of the play, which gives closure to her gender identity as a woman. Together, these ideas demonstrate that gender norms are not fixed, so sexuality, which a society assigns based on gender, is not fixed either. Therefore, in addition to friendships, romance between two women can exist.
Projection is imagining personal desires and feelings onto others, creating an idealized version of them. Orsino doesn't actually love Olivia. He loves the idea of being in love. His everlasting pining and verse rambling illustrates how narcissistic he is, with his own fantasy, not reality. This indicates how people today seem to fall for the idea of someone and not for who the person actually is. Orsino is the Shakespeare version of someone obsessing over a crush they barely know, when in reality they just want to steal something to fill in the void. This means the feeling of emptiness in one's heart they can't fill on their own. They need to depend on another person to fulfill that emptiness. Ariel gives her entire voice to a guy who's only ever seen one. Isn't that something familiar? In 12th Night, it's Orsino who's obsessed, even though he barely knows Olivia. The stories both show how passion blinds us and love turns into performance we act for ourselves. Festy, better witty for Liz school than a foolish wit. Festy is a character who, through his sarcasm and wit, reveals the truth no one else wants to acknowledge. While his sarcastic comments reveal the flaws of the other characters and lies, it's the same honesty that makes him an outsider. Similarly, in Joker, Joker expressed pain through chaos, the genie hides his own desires behind jokes. Despite being the one always telling the truth, he's always criticizing people for their emotional weaknesses, thus keeping him at arm's length for people he may encounter.
All in all, patriarchal gender and societal expectations suppress authentic human connection, enable deception, and obstruct the acceptance of individual identity. Some argue that not complying with the social status quo is detrimental to society. Others argue that the expression of true self triumphs what society wants one to act like. We need to recognize that it is possible for any relationship to exist, regardless of the social validity. As times change and ideas surrounding gender, social norms, and parameters of romance and friendship are continuously explored and challenged, it becomes evident that nothing that is so is so. And unlike those in 12th Night, remember to be the captain of your own journey. Thank you.
Okay, great job, thank you. All right, you guys have a seat, and we're gonna open the floor for some questions. All right, let's let them get seated. All right, so I see 1 and 2, so let's start, 1, 2, and 3. So in the back, the last row, so you first, yeah. Hey.
Say it.
Yeah, just loud, and
I have a question for both groups separately. So first, I want to ask a question to Adrian's group. So you guys were talking about how Hamlet was alienating his audience in the play, and therefore kind of establishing that disconnect and not connecting with the shared experiences of the audience. Like you mentioned that as a distinction between the two texts. So this is a sort of like not related to your text question. What are your thoughts on like this modern, maybe not modern, phenomena of like trauma healing and like being like, who's more traumatized? Oh. And
let me maybe try to reword it, just repeat it louder for everybody. So given your conversation or your comments about Hamlet alienating himself from the audience, what are their thoughts on trauma healing? Is that trauma scaling?
I would traumatizing you like that.
Yes.
Okay.
What do you think is the purpose of that, and like how does it relate to like alienation?
Okay. Very good question. Thank you. So I actually didn't know that had a name, so trauma scaling. Thank you. I think my opinion on it is different from the purpose of what it's used for. I think that the purpose of trauma scaling is most likely a traumatic response of wanting your experience to be validated. In the case of someone who maybe thinks, oh, what they went through wasn't so bad, they might say, oh, you had it worse, because they want to like make themselves smaller, not make a big issue. In contrast to that, some people who maybe haven't been hurt, they'll say, well, I had this happen to me, so I have the worst situation. And that's not really productive either, but I understand why that happens, and I think that's a trauma response that is, although it's valid, it needs to be worked through and maybe not occur so much. My personal opinion on that is, me personally, I'm not a fan of when people do that and don't recognize it after the fact, because not only for myself, but for other people need to be heard as well. And it can't always be a matter of, oh, this happened to me, oh, this happened to me, oh, this happened to me. Everything that everyone goes through as well. So, thank you for your question.
Okay, I am gonna let one of the other people, and we'll come back to you. Okay, so yes,
This is a question for age group. I want to kind of go with the idea of the idea of seeing angst. So, obviously, I'm in the life profession. That's like definitely teenage angst, but I want to talk about the idea of like maybe even like the whole alternative scene in general. Because again, you bring up the idea of an alternative scene, you bring up the idea of like quote unquote angst, or just overall emotional or mental trauma in like society between like Hamlet is more way before our current time, and then we have what was the other
Person being Wallflower?
Yeah, I feel like that's more definitely modern day, but still not 20% modern day. But I want to go into like more modern day, but also like like between the bachelor's and now, how do you think the representation of the alternative scene or overall how do you think the alternative scene represents the idea of doing things or the idea of coping with traumatic situations or overall how do you think these specific scenes, like not just like so like every single part of the alternative scene kind of goes into this idea of like self-expression of not just who we are but also what we are?
That is a great question. Thank you, Daniel. It's a loaded one though, so let me think about this. I think that we're a more accepting place here at Townsend, but I think in other places, you see someone that dresses alternative, you think, oh, well, look at that one over there, and that's not great, people should express themselves the way that they want to express themselves, and the way it relates to trauma and such, in my opinion, this could be very different for other people, is that when you feel othered in the first place, that you're different from everybody else, you want to like delve into that because all you have is yourself at that point, right? And as a community, the alternative scene, I'm not someone into Dubai, I know a bit. The alternative scene as a whole is more of a community for people that have experienced similar things. And as we know, My Chemical Romance is a very prominent band in the alternative scene, like Fall Out Boy, Panic! Disco. And seeing our heroes, like Gerard Way and Brendan Urie and such, seeing our heroes have the exact same feelings that we do as teenagers, and they're adults, that it's validating. And I think alternative movements, visual K movements, everything that makes you othered, it's really a community for people that understand and want to hear you. Thank you for your question.
Okay, so we had another question in the back. Try to keep it like to a question.
Yeah. I was thinking about like the fourth wall breaks that were happening, like a lot of resources. They kind of remind me of like parasocial relationships. Like is there any notable insight you could like add on to that idea? Where the character was like almost trying to form a bond with the audience, but like can't actually interact with them back.
That's definitely a parasocial relationship. We actually toyed with using that word, but we actually didn't use that word because I think parasocial relationship has a very negative connotation to it. We see it in modern day now. People have a parasocial relationship with celebrities. It's like, okay, bro, like chill out a little bit because you don't know this guy, you don't know this person. I think for Hamlet and Charlie, if we use Charlie for example, I wouldn't use the word parasocial relationship. I think what the word says is correct and that you're having a one-sided relationship, but I think it has a negative connotation. I think there's another word for it that we could use, such as breaking the fourth wall or an audience-character relationship, but I think it's all about connotation.
Okay.
Question for the other group?
Yeah, let's try to have a question for the other group. Do you have it? Okay, no, I'll come back to you. Yeah.
So I just want to get a clarification on like how you guys view gender roles and such because we run into how a lot of the times masculine characters are the one initiating relationships, and one of the characters I believe has taken on like a very like masculine features. So like does that mean like whatever a man does is considered masculine, whatever a woman does is considered feminine? What's your response to that?
Yeah, so we explored this or we defined it based on patriarchy and the idea that men are seen as the more dominant gender, and as a result, anything along the lines of being active, being bold, or being or taking the initiative is classified more on the masculine stance according to patriarchy. So that's why we kind of characterize it like that.
Did you want to ask your other question, Jennifer?
So we kind of mentioned how sometimes the line between like friendship and romance is blurred, especially when it comes to like what fits in and what doesn't fit in the social norms. So why do you think we have this like necessity to characterize or make a distinction between friendship and romantic feelings? And do you think that this distinction creates a sort of power structure in the way we view those kind of relationships?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? It's really hard to hear from like
I think why do we make a distinction between romantic relationships and standard friendships? And is that distinction necessary to uphold power structures, or does that subvert power structures? Is that where the question went?
It's sort of like the beginning part, and how does that, if you think it does, how does that create another power structure in the way we view and prioritize these relationships? And how do you think that's changed over time, if it has?
Okay, so like in a patriarchy, like Orsino, he's a duke, so obviously he's gonna want someone as his like partner, like to flaunt her off basically, since Olivia is like known as this like beautiful like woman, the most beautiful woman in the land, so he wants her basically as his like possession basically. So like that is like, I guess we defined it as like that wasn't a real relationship, so we're defining how it could go into like a romantic or friendship, and how you can view someone as like a friend or like a partner. And so basically, since Cesario has basically his disguise as a male and then also his true identity as a woman, he acts as like a man towards Orsino, and they like form this friendship. But like suddenly when Viola, like Cicero reveals his identity as Viola, a woman, suddenly he's like got romantic like feelings for her. So basically we're just like trying to split the lines between how the friendship between Cesario and Orsino differ from the romantic relationship between Viola and Orsino.
Okay, all right, we have to stop. That's time. So thank you for all the great questions. If you want to come down and talk to the presenters, you're welcome. Thank you.
What's this?